Welcome, everybody, to the Come of Shame Veterinary Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Andy Roark. Guys, I got a good one today. This is why I do this job. I love conversations like this. I am here with my friend, the economist, Matt Saloy, talking about his new article, which basically lays out the idea that we are in a recession in veterinary medicine. We are in a recession. We have been since probably late 2024. And Matt thinks that we've got 6 months ahead of us probably before we start to get back into a growth phase. And so it's actually, don't be like, it's a recession talk, this is going to be depressing. And that's a pretty optimistic guy. And I love it when optimistic people have good data to back up what they're talking about. I asked him flat out, is it time to stop hiring relief vets and just hoard all the cases that we can? And he's more positive than a lot of people that I have heard. I pressed him on this. I talked to him about the rising costs of healthcare. I talked to him about how everything else seems to be getting more expensive. How can you possibly be optimistic about a mere 6 months from now, us being back in a growth phase? But he didn't back down. I asked Matt, what would you do if you were running a clinic? How would you handle our current period? What changes would you make? Where would you be really looking to tighten your belt? Where would you not look to tighten your belt? It was great. Anyway, check it out. This is a great episode. Let's get into it.
This is your show. We're glad you're here. We want to help you in your veterinary career. Welcome to the Cone of Shame with Dr. Andy Roark.
Welcome to the show, Matt Saloy. It's good to have you here, my friend.
Yeah, good to be back. Thanks, Andy.
Man,
good to see you.
I always enjoy these conversations with you, and this is the perfect time. This podcast is coming out right around the first of the year. We're doing a January thing, but you and I are recording here at the very end of 2025.
We're almost there. Almost there.
Just like limping across the finish line. I am hammered down working until mandatory holiday fun, which is, it's been put on my calendar and protected, and then that's going to be hammered down, traveling with the family. And then it'll be January 2nd, and it'll be right back into the chaos. And like, there's no rest.
This is what the cycle is in veterinary medicine. It's like you get to unwind a bit for this, a week or two if you're so graced to do that at the end of the year. And then January hits you with like a cold bucket of water, right? You've got VLC and VMX and all these events, and it's fun and it's exciting, but it's a race, isn't it?
Oh man, the first quarter of the year is always just absolute bananas for me. And then from September till Thanksgiving is also bananas. That's how it used to be. Now the bananas just kind of never stop.
Bananas everywhere.
Bananas all the way down. All right. For those who do not know you, you are a self-described husband, father, and economist. You are the president of VMG, the Veterinary Management Groups, and you were a friend of mine. You are such a smart person. I love talking to you about vet medicine. I wanted to talk to you today about a recent publication you had. It is in the journal Frontiers, and your article is entitled Anticipating the Downturn, Business Cycle Forecasting for Veterinary Practice Strategy.
Really exciting title, isn't it?
I was like, God, this is sexy and exciting. And I can't stay away. It's like catnip. So I have a very simple question for you. I have been told my whole career that vet medicine is recession proof. And then there was a pandemic. I don't know if you remember that. And it was like, resistant. Is recession resistant? And in your article, you basically say, as of the end of 2024, that's not true. Matt Saloy, are we in veterinary medicine in a recession?
Yes. Just get to the point. We absolutely are. The data confirm it. They will continue to confirm it. And first, I'm going to say gratitude to Dr. Clint Neal and Charlotte McKay, co-authors and fellow economists on this paper. Did a lot of work, but you just nailed the motivation of why we wrote it, because the thing with academic papers is we actually started this a couple of years ago. Building the forecast model, plotting out the business cycle for veterinary medicine, and then, of course, just recently getting to being published. But what we were hearing at that time, and actually still continue to hear, is just these strong opinions, diverging opinions about what was happening in veterinary medicine around that time. Some side were saying demand was still strong. Pet growth is growing. We're going to need more veterinarians. We can't keep up with demand. And other side was starting to notice some of the slippage, the downturn, the slowing down. And I think practices were feeling like things were getting tighter. tighter, but the data and the people were pointing to a different story. So what stood out to us was this very interesting divergence that we kept hearing these strong opinions on both sides, but very little actual empirical work that tried to disentangle things like price effects from real demand. So what we wanted to do was let data be the referee, right? Whenever a story starts to sound plausible, you really need to let data be the referee and step back and build a model that could tell us more about what was happening with veterinary business from a business cycle perspective.
I've been hearing a lot about sort of a tale of two economies recently, and there's this idea that if you look at the macroeconomy at a high level, people will point to a high GDP and a relatively low unemployment rate and say the stock market, they're like, the economy is strong. But boy, consumer confidence is in the toilet as of the time of our recording, like historic lows. Mel, what are the indicators that you decided to look at in this paper? Like, what did you measure to decide this is the official call?
Yeah. I mean, the primary measure for us understanding what's happening in veterinary medicine from a business perspective is real inflation-adjusted veterinary service spending. So we looked at inflation-adjusted data on aggregate client spending on veterinary care. So it's just veterinary care, let's be clear. It's not pet products, it's not nutrition. It's specifically veterinary services, the kind of services you receive within a practice. And then what we tried to do once we adjusted for inflation is then look at economic indicators that drive that. And so a lot of aggregate macroeconomic indicators, things like household income, unemployment, a very important barometer called U.S. industrial production, inflation being a key one, both general inflation and veterinary inflation went into this to build that forecast model so we could be more forward looking, because there's a lot of great dashboards and metrics out there. I look at them, things like VetWatch and VetSource. They track practice revenue and invoices. And those are really great metrics to look at. But first of all, they're nominal. It means they're not inflation adjusted. And so when you see revenue going up, is that demand? Is that quantity of services increasing? Or is that a price effect? Because prices are rising, right? And so it's really important to disentangle those effects in order to get a real look at, or as close a look as you can get at what's happening with demand. And then when you do that, you need to then know where you are in the cycle. Are you expanding or are you contracting? Because the strategies you then employ as a veterinary practice are very different in those different environments and what phase of the cycle you're at.
I'm glad that you put it that way. So your position right now is that we are in contraction or that we're going into contraction. Is that correct?
That's right. And I would take it a step further and say not only contracting, I would call it recessionary, meaning it's not only contracting in terms of it's getting smaller, but it's negative. And it's been consistently negative now for well over a year, throughout most of this year to the tail end of 24. And so what that means is that we've dipped below zero from a growth perspective, and spending is actually getting lower than it was the prior period.
Gotcha. All right. So you are the president of VMG. You think a lot about what it means to have a well-managed practice. You think a lot about strategies for coping with these things. In your article, you guys talk a little bit about workforce planning and attrition as strategies for coping with this sort of recessionary phase. Are we at a place where we need to stop hiring relief vets and start circling the wagon, really, and just like tell our staff a bit like, hey guys, it's time to suck it up. We need to tighten our belts here. We need to start bringing these things in-house and keeping as much. Is that where we are? Are those the types of strategies that you think vet clinics should really be looking at now?
Yeah, I think. And so let me first give the caveat that there's the macro perspective in terms of what does the macro aggregate story tell you? And then there's the micro perspective of what's happening in your practice, what's happening in your market area. And it can be, honestly, it can be very different. But if your practice is following the trends of the macro, of the aggregate, the national trends, it is when you're in a contracting recessionary environment, generally, you're scaling back on expenses and costs. And so you're not going to probably invest in the new equipment, MRI or X-ray machine.
Right.
You're probably not going to want to expand your practice and put in that new exam room or hire that new FTE, whether it's a DVM or a technician or a new practice manager, because demand is not going to generate the returns necessary to support those investments. But here's the trick is you always want to stay ahead of the curve. And so really what you want to do as a business owner is not make decisions based on the cycle you're in. you really want to be thinking about the decisions for the cycle you're going to be in next.
Okay.
And that's, I think, part of the purpose of the paper was to be predictive and say, where are we going next? And I mean, that's the question everyone wants to know, like, what's going on? How do we predict what's happening in our market? And so that's the good news I like to end on is it's been a really tough year. Feels like it's been a tough few years.
It feels like 2025 was a terrible 5 years. It was very difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult 5 years.
And one of the biggest factors affecting demand, not unsurprisingly, is inflation. And we're battling that at a national level. We're battling that in veterinary medicine. But we need to soften that. We need to dampen that. The good news is as long as inflation continues to come down and we continue to drive it down, and status quo, all the other macroeconomic indicators remain stable, things like unemployment and household income, the U.S. doesn't dip into a recession. The forecast model is telling us that we are as about close to rock bottom as we're going to get. Meaning,
that's good to hear.
Yeah, that's good. It's good news. So that beginning next year, we should start to see the market, veterinary services, start to recover. And we're still going to be in the negative territory, but each month is going to be less and less negative. And then what the forecast model is telling us by Q3 of next year, we should be into a growth mode again and moving into that positive growth territory.
So that's pretty optimistic. That's a pretty optimistic take on this, really. Like I think what you're saying is, Andy, the worst of it is you've already been through it for the most part. The year that we just got through was the bad year. And I'm like, I love finding out that I already did the bad part. Whenever anyone tells me, oh, the worst part was the part you already did, like that's music to my ears. So if I'm interpreting you sort of correctly, you would think, and again, every practice is different. We are talking in broad swaths, but you would say that you think that we have probably seen about as bad as it's probably going to get. And if you have made it with your current sort of position that you have now, and you can maintain that, then there's a good reason to think that if you can hold what you have, that by the back half of 2026, we might start to be seeing some growth again and feeling a release from the pressure that we've been under. Is that accurate?
That's it. And so we've been in the dark tunnel this year. In my opinion, we're through the darkest point, right? And now it's closer to the light at the end of the tunnel than when we came into it. We still need to be very financially conservative here because we are still in that contractionary, recessionary environment. But we got to be thinking at least 2 quarters ahead here. And so when it goes to your question of, do we let go of that relief vet? Do we let go of that staff? Now is a good time to hit a pause and say, what do I think is going to happen next with my practice, with demand in my area this time next year? Because you want to be ready for that. That's the time that you want to be able to have the resources, whether it's the exam room, the veterinarian, whatever it might be, to then maximize on the demand that we'll be taking in at that time.
Yeah. Okay. I like that a lot. That makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you this. You're much more rosy than I have kind of been just looking at the world, right? And so obviously you've looked even into the profession. Man, we're looking at the start of 2026 and we're looking at January and everything's more expensive every time I go out. And, at the grocery store costs more and more. And, I've got family members who are looking at an $800 a month increase in their health insurance starting in January. I've got other people, I have friends I just talked to today who were looking at $600 for their family. And that's a monthly increase. And I'm going, ouch, this feels like we're going in the wrong direction. And my thoughts with vet medicine, I've really tried hard to parse apart what are we responsible for and what are the things that we have control of versus what are we just afloat? We're a buoy being tossed around on a much bigger ocean in terms of economic forces, right? When a pet owner comes into the vet clinic and they go, I don't have money to pay for this procedure. Yeah. I'm not convinced that if that procedure was half the price, they would suddenly have money for it. At some point, if everything is expensive, it's going to be hard to get people to prioritize wellness care for pets over putting food on the table and paying for health care and things like that. And so I don't know. I mean, how much power do you think that we have? I guess what I'm asking is, how savvy can we be in our strategies and the way that we run our businesses when we're looking at forces that feel so large? Do you think there's a graceful way through this, or do you think we're all going to get tossed around and you're just trying to smooth off the edges a bit?
Yeah, it feels like someone's always tossing us off the ship, right? But I think there are absolutely opportunities to smooth that, but it's not easy. Inflation is hard, and inflation in veterinary medicine is hard. And I always try to be careful depending on the audience who I'm talking to, because if you're talking to clients and you talk about veterinary inflation, they think, well, these practices are just raising their prices and raising their prices. But when you operate on the inside, you understand what's happening here is that labor costs have increased significantly. The cost of diagnostics have risen significantly. New innovations, new treatments, pharmaceuticals, the costs of those have risen as well. And, as a practice owner, that's the construct you're facing. You don't control those inputs necessarily, not all of them anyway. Mm-hmm. And adding to the pressure of inflation is something that you kind of mentioned a bit earlier around how people are experiencing that inflation. You hear a lot, maybe you've read a lot around what people are calling, a lot of economists are calling the K-shaped economy, mm-hmm. K-shaped recovery, right? And so you have a lot of well-to-dos, the top 10%, 20% of income earners in this household are doing fine. They're spending, but then you look at even the middle class, it's not even the top 20 of the bottom 20%. You're talking about just regular 50, 60, 70% income thresholds. Like their spending is barely keeping pace with inflation. And so where that K-shape comes out, if you look at things like market indices like the S&P 500, or other stock indices, which a lot of wealthy households have their wealth tied into, that's moving up and up and up since 2020. You look at indices like consumer sentiment or spending amongst middle and lower income households. And by middle income, I'm talking households that make $200,000 a year. We think that's plenty, but actually their spending is going down or barely keeping pace with inflation. And so that's where that K-shape comes from, is this bifurcation of how different households are experiencing that economy. And so that's an extra complication, because now you're dealing basically with two sets of consumers, whether you're a veterinary practice or any business.
Matt, if you walked into a vet practice and say I'm the practice owner, or the decision maker who's there, and I said, Matt, I need your help. I'm looking at where we are. I'm looking at the economy that we're in. I'm kind of looking ahead. And let's say that I'm buying into the idea that hopefully by Q3 of 2026, things will be coming back up. I say, Matt, help me to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do. What questions would you ask me to try to help me to understand kind of what I need to do or assess where I am?
Yeah, that's a great one. What we know is clients are really price sensitive right now, and others are extremely price sensitive. And so when you take that into consideration, this creates a trap. So practices that rely too heavily on price increases to support revenue, they're at risk of deceleration when demand starts to pull back, because they're on the flip side of this elasticity there.
Okay.
So you've got to keep this in mind when you are thinking about strategies around how do you hold demand steady in this high inflationary environment, and when you have different clients and consumers who have different sensitivities to those prices. And so I think this means a few things. One, spectrum of care is no longer optional. I think if practices hold one price point, a one size fits all approach to veterinary care, that's going to create a trap in a scenario of loss. And so we've got to think about structured options and tiers of care to provide clients and give them a menu of options to choose from. So that's first. Secondly, communication here is mission critical. And the pullback that we're seeing here, I think, in visits and invoices being down isn't necessarily because clients are saying no, they don't care about veterinary care. They're increasingly saying no because they're prioritizing other aspects of their limited budget. And so when money gets tight, I say confusion gets expensive. You can no longer allow clients to be confused around the value of what's being provided. You have to take the time to explain every recommendation to them and why it's important. That's no longer an option there. The third, and we've talked, I think, in the past, Andy, around the importance of productivity, but this matters a whole lot more than volume right now, because when demand fragments like we're seeing, efficiency ultimately determines the financial sustainability of your practice. Efficiency allows you to reduce your costs, but also support lower prices as a result. And I think at some point, we're going to have to scale back here and make pricing and affordability more manageable for clients. The only way we're going to get there is through productivity and efficiency. I think those are the top three things I would recommend a practice in this environment, because those are the things that are going to matter and turn into practical change on the ground.
So you're not someone who believes that sort of service innovation is going to save us in the short term? I'm with you. I think that practice efficiency and tightening down our systems and the way that we do things, to me, that makes a lot of sense. There's always optimists out there who are like service innovation. Are there things that we could add and we can do differently and we can change in order to sort of unlock a path forward? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think it's definitely a path forward. The role of technology innovation can create new doorways that didn't exist before. But I think for some, it feels unreachable because then they think, well, I don't know what to innovate on. I don't know what to do. I was just meeting with a VMG member up in Wisconsin, Dr. Marty Greer. She's got a great practice she's innovated on. It's a drive-in, drive-out practice where the client actually created these. If you think about, oil change facility, right? The client actually rolls their car into the practice. The technician, the staff meet them right there. There's no exam room. There's no intermingling of pets in a waiting room. The care is all delivered there. The stress of the pet has been completely almost eliminated or at least minimized. And then when the care is done, they get back in their car and they drive right out.
It's like a brew through, like when you drive through and I don't know if people know what those are, but yeah, you roll right into the beer store and they just load you up and you drive out the other side. So I'm told.
Yeah. And this was innovating, right? Obviously, Dr. Greer would do a lot of things around workflow and training
to
optimize care in that environment. But her clients love it because it's easier for them. They feel de-stressed about it. They're not worried about what's going to happen when they're in the main lobby or the exam room. So it takes a lot of the fear out of it. But that's what I mean. So I think innovation is definitely a pathway, but I think it's not the only pathway, because what I see with a lot of practices is what's holding them back is it's nothing new. It's the same old, same old. It's workflows that aren't effective. It's bottlenecks in the exam room. It's bottlenecks in the pharmacy. It's a CSR that's being very ineffective and not clearly communicating at the front desk, not forward booking. I mean, we've talked about these things for years. And so I often advise in these environments is, yes, innovation will help, but oftentimes going back to basics is going to get you 80% there.
Yeah. That's so great. Matt, this has been fantastic. I always love talking with you. I am going to put a link to the paper itself down in the show notes. It's absolutely worth diving into. It is a robust article. It is really fascinating. Where can people find you online? Where can they keep up with future publications and research?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I always love to talk to you. I'm active on LinkedIn, posting on data and an occasional funny or not pun or dad joke or two. I've also got a webpage at myvmg.com where you can learn more about VMG and what we do.
Outstanding. Matt, thanks for being here. Guys, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Take care of yourselves, gang. We'll talk to you later. And that's what we got. Guys, thanks for being here. Thanks to Matt for walking me through all of this. I get so much out of talking with him. He's such a great guest. Gang, take care of yourselves, everybody. Be well. I'll talk to you later.